The command cut through the night like a blade. He wasn't carrying anything, just a paper bag from the store. Yet the officer's gaze burned into him, heavy with suspicion, as though his very skin was a crime. Shouts rose from onlookers. Phones came out. His chest tightened, pulse racing. He had seen this scene before, but always on someone else's screen. Now it was his turn. What followed would expose more than one man's struggle. It would reveal a system built to break him. "Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments." Amara had always carried herself with quiet grace, the kind of presence that drew respect without her ever demanding it. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood, she was the daughter of a hard-working school teacher and a nurse who had dedicated their lives to giving her the opportunities they never had. From the very beginning, Amara's world was colored by both the struggles of her race and the beauty of her resilience. She excelled in academics, stood tall against subtle prejudices at school, and never allowed the whispers about her skin color or background to define her worth. By the time she reached her mid-20s, she had carved a space for herself in the corporate world, where she was admired not just for her intelligence, but for her character. She believed in love, family, and building a future with the man who had promised to stand by her side forever. That man was Daniel, a polished figure from a wealthy family whose charm swept her into a love story she thought would last a lifetime. To her, Daniel symbolized not just romance, but security, a chance to merge two worlds, to prove that love could bridge differences of class and race. Their engagement had been the talk of both families. Friends whispered about how Amara had risen above expectations, how she was living a dream many thought impossible for a black woman who didn't come from wealth. Daniel's family, however, carried silent reservations, ones that revealed themselves in small, cutting comments about her background, her place, and her ability to give him a future. Amara brushed them aside, convinced that love was enough to silence prejudice. For a while, her life felt steady, hopeful even. She poured herself into building a home with Daniel, preparing for the life they were supposed to share. Yet beneath the surface, cracks began to form. Medical visits turned into whispers, test results became shadows, and soon the conversations around children, the very idea of motherhood, turned into unspoken judgments. Daniel's patience thinned, and the warmth that once wrapped her heart began to fade. Still, Amara held on. She carried the pain of uncertainty, but never let it break her. She leaned on faith, on her deep-rooted belief that her worth was not defined by biology. Yet Daniel's family began to circle like vultures, reminding her of what she lacked, pressuring him with their narrow views. They did not see her resilience, her brilliance, or her loyalty. They saw only what she supposedly could not provide. And then one evening that should have marked the happiest day of her life, Amara's world shattered. The man who had promised forever walked away, leaving her humiliated, branded by a word that cut deeper than any insult: infertile. She thought that moment would destroy her. But what she didn't know was that fate was already writing a new chapter, one that would one day lead her back into Daniel's world, stronger, wealthier, and surrounded by blessings he could never have imagined. In the days that followed Daniel's betrayal, Amara's life became a storm she never saw coming. Whispers spread quickly, louder than the vows that were supposed to bind her future. In Daniel's circle, she was no longer the promising fiancée from a modest background. She was branded the woman who couldn't give him an heir. The cruelty wasn't hidden. It came in hushed voices at social events, in pitying looks from acquaintances, and in the open disdain of Daniel's family. They spoke as if her worth had expired the moment he walked away, but the worst wound came not from strangers. It came from the man she loved. Daniel moved on almost immediately, flaunting his mistress, a woman who seemed to embody everything Amara supposedly lacked: glamour, fertility, and a background of wealth. Their photographs filled society pages, each picture another dagger in Amara's chest. She became the subject of ridicule, a painful example whispered in elite gatherings, the black girl who wasn't enough. Racism, too, slithered into the narrative, though disguised in subtle cruelty. Maybe Daniel needed someone more fitting, his relatives muttered. Someone who could carry the family name properly. Amara understood the hidden venom. It wasn't just about children. It was about her skin. Her heritage, the fact that she was never meant to belong in their world of chandeliers and silver spoons. The label of infertile was a weapon, but so was her race. Together, they painted her as an outsider unworthy of Daniel's future. The humiliation pushed her into solitude. For weeks, Amara drifted between grief and numbness. She avoided familiar places, afraid of the stares that reminded her of her broken engagement. Nights felt longer and mornings carried no promise. Yet even in her lowest moments, something within her refused to shatter completely. Her parents' lessons echoed in her mind. Your worth is not defined by others. Your life is not over because of their rejection. She began to rebuild quietly. She took a new job offer in a neighboring city, one that pulled her away from the gossip. The work was grueling, but it gave her purpose. Still, the scars remained until one revelation shifted everything. Daniel's mistress, the woman who had replaced her, was caught in scandal. She had siphoned money from her late father's estate, assets that Amara herself had been too grief-stricken to investigate after his passing. The betrayal was bitter, but buried in the records was a shocking truth. Her father had left behind more than she ever realized. Shares, properties, and investments that, when untangled, pointed to a fortune. It wasn't just wealth, it was legacy. A billion-dollar inheritance that belonged solely to her, waiting for her to claim it. The discovery lit a fire in her. For the first time in months, she no longer felt like a victim of circumstance, but the heir of a destiny carefully guarded by time. She hired lawyers, financial experts, and advisors. Slowly, her life transformed. She became not only secure but powerful. Yet life's blessings didn't stop there. Years later, Amara met a man who saw beyond the scars of her past. Unlike Daniel, he wasn't intimidated by her strength or wealth. He cherished it. Their bond grew, and together they built a family. 4 children filled the home she once feared would remain silent. Their laughter proved that the word infertile was nothing more than a cruel lie. But the world hadn't forgotten Daniel, and neither had she. He rose in his career, hosting extravagant galas to showcase his success. To the public, he was untouchable. But beneath the polished veneer, cracks were forming. Whispers of his failing marriage, financial missteps, and his arrogance began to circulate. When the invitation to his annual gala arrived, Amara paused. She didn't need to attend. She had nothing left to prove. But destiny whispered differently. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. About showing the world and herself that the woman once cast aside had risen higher than anyone dared to imagine. On the night of the gala, she prepared with calm resolve. The mirror reflected not the broken fiancé Daniel had abandoned, but a woman who had turned pain into power. Draped in elegance, her billionaire husband at her side, and her 4 children radiant in their innocence, Amara walked into a night that would forever rewrite the narrative. And as the chandeliers lit the ballroom and heads began to turn, a hush fell over the crowd. Daniel stood at the center of his empire, smiling for cameras, unaware that the past he tried to bury had just stepped into the room. Stronger, richer, and unstoppable. The confrontation was coming. And it would leave everyone breathless. The ballroom was alive with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Daniel, dressed in his tailored suit, basked in the spotlight as if nothing could shake the foundation of his empire. Cameras flashed, guests whispered praises, and he carried himself like a man untouched by consequence. But all of that shifted the moment Amara stepped through the doors. The crowd's chatter faltered, one gasp after another rippling across the hall. Heads turned, eyes widened, and in seconds the atmosphere shifted. She stood there with regal composure, her presence commanding more attention than the host himself. At her side was her billionaire husband, exuding quiet power, and surrounding her were 4 radiant children whose laughter seemed to echo louder than the music. Daniel froze. His glass trembled, the smile plastered on his face, draining into disbelief. For years he had mocked her name, painted her as unworthy, and whispered that she was infertile. Now, in front of everyone he had sought to impress, the truth stared him down. The mistress he had chosen instead tried to hold his hand, but the crowd's attention had already shifted. Murmurs spread quickly. "Is that her? The one he left? She has children. And her husband? He's worth billions." What once was his moment of triumph was crumbling into ashes. Amara walked gracefully into the center of the room, each step deliberate, each glance a reminder of the scars she had carried. She didn't need to speak. Her presence was her answer. The same community that had ridiculed her now saw the reality. She was the one who had risen, while Daniel was exposed as the man who had traded love for pride and prejudice. The mistress's scandal resurfaced in whispers, too. How she had stolen from Amara's father's estate. How the wealth Daniel flaunted had been built on lies and betrayal. Security closed in on her, and gasps filled the air as she was escorted out in shame. The humiliation that once belonged to Amara now rested squarely on their shoulders. Daniel tried to stand tall to mask the collapse of his pride, but the silence of the room weighed heavier than any words. He was no longer the admired host. He was the man who had abandoned a black woman for nothing, only to watch her return as the embodiment of everything he claimed she could never be. And in that moment, as eyes shifted from him to her, the balance of power changed forever. Because tonight, the woman once branded as infertile owned the room. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. As the gala wound down, it was clear who truly commanded the night. Amara hadn't raised her voice, hadn't sought revenge, and yet she left the room with every head turned in awe. The same people who once whispered about her supposed failures now looked at her with admiration, even envy. But the victory wasn't about wealth, glamour, or the spectacle of the evening. It was about reclaiming dignity that had once been stripped away under the weight of prejudice. For Amara, the moment wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. Years ago, she had been humiliated not only as a woman, but as a black woman, carrying the compounded burden of gendered and racial injustice. She had been mocked, discarded, and written off because society too often accepts the lie that women like her are less than. Yet here she stood, not defined by the cruelty of others, but by her own resilience. Her children's laughter filled the hall like a hymn of vindication. Proof that the label forced on her was nothing more than a weapon of ignorance. But as powerful as her triumph was, it carried a deeper truth that reaches far beyond her story. Too many black women are still silenced, still doubted, still reduced to stereotypes. Too many are forced to fight twice as hard for the respect that should be theirs by birthright. Amara's story may have ended in triumph, but for countless others, the wounds of racism and prejudice remain open, replaying in schools, workplaces, hospitals, and homes across the world, and that is why her journey matters. It is a reminder that strength can grow from suffering, that injustice does not have the final word, and that dignity can outshine discrimination. But it is also a call to action, for us to recognize the systems that continue to marginalize, and to stand with those who are still fighting to be seen and valued. When Amara walked out of that gala, she didn't just leave with her family by her side. She left with her head high, a living testimony to survival and victory. And perhaps the most powerful message of all is this: she didn't need revenge. Her success was enough. Her story forces us to ask a question we cannot ignore. How many more women must endure humiliation before we learn to honor their worth from the very beginning? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. And tell us in the comments, what does dignity mean to you?